Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. The show is designed to give you solutions to your day-to-day management and leadership problems. It's hosted by Matthew Haddock, a frontline manager and leader with over 25 years of experience. If you're ready, then let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. I do hope you are well and getting the results you need through your team. My name is Matthew Haddock, and as you know, if you've listened before, I'm here to give you leadership practical, leadership human, and leadership real. Today's episode, we're going to look at what some leaders face and some leaders fear. And of course, we know sometimes these questions need to be answered. So why not join me this week, talk about when is it time to change your team? Not a tweak, not coaching around the edges, not hoping things improve, because the worst thing you can do is hope, but real change. Because there is a truth here that building a team is one thing, but knowing when it's evolved to a point where it needs to be reshaped and even broken apart, that is the real test of where real leaders get to. So let's get straight into it. So first thing, why would you want to change your team? What do I mean by that? Look, teams don't stay high performing forever. We know that teams develop, and some teams are never high performing, and that is a problem in itself. But even the best teams, the ones you maybe have built yourself, maybe the ones that you trust, can become comfortable, can become stale. And comfort can be dangerous. You'll start to see the signs, same conversations on different days, same resistance to new ideas, same decline in energy. This is how we've always done it, creeps in. Whoa, an awful line. Oh, an awful line. Hear that again. This is what we've always done. Terrible, isn't it? And as a leader, your job isn't to protect that comfort. Your job is to drive performance, look at driving growth, drive results. That's why they pay you. Fix problems, get results. Sometimes that does mean change. If you're going in there and you're getting your Groundhog Days, but you find that people are entrenched, you find that people are starting to move to silos. There's another sign of this. People start to silo. Then there's a time that you really need to look at making those change. And there's some benefits to change. Let's be clear, you're not making change for change's sake. You sometimes see that when new managers come in, they start to make these changes. And you still have to wonder, are those changes just because you're there and why not? Or are they there because they really are a change? And change in a team isn't just about fixing problems, although it will. But done right, it really does unlock some benefit for you. It'll unlock things like fresh thinking, new energy, that decision making, the fostering it at the right position, not just with you, but with all the people around. You get the better alignment of current goals, and the business starts to look at how it can get rid of its silos, because that change, the benefit of that change, starts to shape people up. And we'll go into it a little bit more in detail, how I think that the change of your team, moving people around, can really make people see things from a different direction, and obviously a different angle within the business. So that is the business changes. Businesses are going to get fresh ideas, they're going to get new energy. It's going to foster good decision making. But what about the individual? How does it affect the individual? Because we're talking about a big change here. Could be talking about people moving into areas they really don't feel comfortable, shifting positions in their mind, maybe going down a level. That can be a big challenge. But what you've got to think of as a leader is, what are you doing for that individual? You're unlocking new opportunities for them. You're giving them the chance. And they might not see that at first, but that's your real job, is to open their eyes to the new opportunities. It definitely unlocks personal growth. And personal growth can be a little bit trickier, because some people hide personal growth as a secondary to what you're trying to do. So you might say to someone, go do that task, and it's a task nobody wants. Oh, it's personal growth for you. That's not really personal growth. But if you're looking at a big change and moving people around, this is definitely personal growth, especially if individuals have talked about future. They want to be bigger in the current role. They want to go further. They want a different hierarchy. They want to go up a level. this is a good chance with a change to give people personal growth with the right support. It's also a good way for individuals to break those bad habits they've slipped into. When people get comfortable, and I've dealt with people who've been in jobs 30 odd years, and there's a positive to that, don't get me wrong, but when it looks to it, they have developed bad habits. The habits have become what they normally do, and it will break bad habits by moving them. And of course, it can reignite motivation in others. Ones who've become stale, become in that role for too long, it will give them motivation. A change is good as a rest, they say. Now, people often don't realise how stuck they are, until something is forced upon them. And that is what you're doing in this one. It's a move that they might never have asked for. It's forced because by doing this, not everyone is going to fit exactly in the jigsaw you want them. There's going to be pushback. But change does create movement, and movement creates this progress that you're going to need if you're going to push your business and the department forward. Why do you do it? Why would you make this change? Because, we've said about comfort zones and breaking comfort and all the good things, but realistically, who is at the end of the change? Who should be the one who benefits? Well, of course, it is your customer experience. Here's where it gets more important because, the sole state in your team is to create customer experience, a good customer experience. Customers feel it if you're getting slow responses, lack of kind of innovation, poor ownership of things, or poor ownership of problems, poor ownership of actual issues, inconsistency in delivery. If you're not delivering, people find someone who does. So these changes will make sure your customer experience is improved, will drive it forward, and obviously will help your business and or department deliver. But when it's refreshed, what does it help that team do? What does it mean to the customer? Well, of course, they're going to get new ideas into the service you're delivering because you're moving people around. You're going to get better and higher energy. It's going to be integrated into new energy. There's going to be a little bit of time of transition, and it's good to talk to customers about what that looks like. But you'll end up with better problem solving, especially if you're moving people from one area to another. They're going to bring their own knowledge. They're going to be learning, asking the dumb questions, nothing wrong with that, but also helping your business deliver to your customer. And of course, making sure you stand out. Let's think about all the businesses that you know, all the cases of businesses that have gone under. The difference between a business that survives and the one that stands out is the idea that they have customers at their heart. And by changing your team around, you're definitely going to start to make sure that is on the agenda. Now, one of the things you will notice is when you start to look at these change and real change, people are very entrenched. They have got their ways of thinking. It happens over time, and it's not unnatural. It's normal for this to happen. They know the systems inside and out. Sometimes they've built the systems. They know how it all works. They're comfortable in that system. They're like a comfortable pair of slippers. You feel them, oh, this is nice. I know how these slippers work. They've seen change come and go. So that, especially if you're new or you try to drive these new behaviours, they've seen this come and go. So sometimes they get that entrenched, bury their head in the sand, get my head down, this guy will move along. If I stay in my position off, kick back so much, they'll leave me where I am, I'll be fine. And of course, they've built big influences. They know they're the top dog. People go to them for issues, for questions. They'll know that person knows more than anybody else just because of time served. And that entrenchment, that is the way that they get to a point where they slowly, they don't challenge things. They become acceptance. It stops growing. People get used to it. They become protectors as well, of the past. Instead of building another future, you hear people saying, well, when I first started here, or, well, in my day, that wouldn't have happened. Oh, well, when we first put this system in, that's how it's meant to happen. They have their minds set. And we know, through psychology, that you can break that mindset. You can make the mind be more plastic. It's not fixed. But people do become entrenched, and entrenchment can be dangerous because it doesn't just affect them. It spreads, especially if you've got managers in those positions who have become that entrenched. They are the shadow they cast. So it becomes the culture. So around those managers who are entrenched and on paper And of course, a lot of times people will say that person's brilliant. They've been here 20 years. They built that system. They know the machines. They've worked with that customers for so long. But one thing that doesn't happen is that it doesn't help you get better. It doesn't drive your business forward. Change becomes harder, but it's necessary. You need to make those choices to break that entrenchment. Now, that doesn't mean you do it every 2 minutes. These have got to be thought out, planned changes that can really deliver. And it might not get it right every time. You might not get it right every time. And we'll touch on that in a bit and what happens if it goes wrong. But by doing that, you're going to have to change things around. And one of the things you will hear a lot of when you make these changes is that it's a good thing to move people into departments that they have maybe clashed with in the past, that they have maybe not the most respect for. Now, what does that mean? Well, the old poacher turned gamekeeper. Let's think of it that way around. This is one of those most interesting dynamics of leadership. You know, sometimes the biggest blockers, the ones who really want to stop it, those are the ones you have got the biggest challenge with. Those are the poachers. You know, the rule breakers, the disruptors. Over time, they've become the people who have always been the mavericks, are always complaining about the warehouse, always complaining about the salespeople, always complaining about the IT department. They're always blaming about someone. You then put them into those positions, especially if they've got to lead those areas, then all of a sudden they become the gamekeepers, don't they? If you leave them as poachers, they'll throw the hand grenades over the wall all the time. They'll blame everyone out. If you start to move them around, if you push them, then you see the benefit from them being in there because they're going to see another angle. They're going to see where that frustration that they've had really stands, and they're going to be in a much better position to take control of that issue, to fix the issue. You know, that suddenly that person has to drive change on the other side. They have to make sure that they are delivering back to what was their position. And as a leader, you need to spot it early, the poachers who can become really good gamekeepers. Because when you make that switch, you'll start to see them being challenged, but also they'll come back with a better mindset. I remember moving a person who was very, very vocal around accounts and saying it was slow, it was delivering too slow, there's never get enough information from them, creditors are always chasing them. And we put him into a role to help in the accounts. I mean, it was financial, so it wasn't that he didn't know anything about finance, but he was in a very comfortable position. He'd been working there a while. By moving him into that accounts, all of a sudden he saw the pressure of chasing customers. He saw the pressure of when invoices were incorrect, which was one of his jobs, and he really got an appreciation of the other side. And that helped him understand what was going on. It also helped in the process of improving how things worked, how things flowed, and in the long run, got a lot better out of him. He became much better at seeing the whole because he was very keen on pushing himself and moving on. Now, that's fine. That one guy wanted to move on. He wanted to push the boundaries. He didn't quite like it at first. He felt uncomfortable. Nothing wrong with that. But after a while, he got into it. He really came up with some great ideas and the business got better. But where the other side of it, what happens when you get the pushback? You know, let's not pretend this is going to be easy. You know, when you start changing a team round, you are going to get pushback, no doubt. And it comes from, of course, these high performers who will feel threatened by being moved because they think they're great in that position and they've become the kingmakers, you know, the big fish in a little pond. The long service team members as well, they're going to be worried. They don't like change. They don't want to move. They've got the comfy slippers on, haven't they? Of course, the informal leaders and influencers, ones who might have the title, but definitely have the power, they're going to feel uncomfortable. And even your own peers. By making these changes that might be your team, they're going to be a little bit affected because maybe the person they always went to isn't in that role anymore. And they might even whisper in your ear how it's a bad thing to do. But, you've got to make those changes. And, sometimes these are the things that you're going to do when you get to pushback. What do? It can be subtle, but you will find that when you make those changes, and if it's not done right with the right informant and the right information, you're going to get things like lack of engagement. People are going to be, I don't really want to do this. They might not say it to your face, but they might become switched off. There'll be a quiet resistance. Whenever anything goes wrong, the tiniest bit, could have told you I shouldn't have moved. You can hear it, can't you? Could have told you I shouldn't move. I was always better in that department. I don't know why I'm here. Maybe they slow down. Well, I'm new here. I don't know how it works, especially if people have been there a lot of years. All of a sudden, they're slowing down. Doesn't sound right, does it? They question every decision because all of a sudden you've put them out. You've been the baddie. And all of a sudden, I don't know why you're doing it that way. I wouldn't have done it that way. When I were in that position, I wouldn't have done that. They question everything, And so, how would you deal with that? How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with these people pushing back? How will the lack of engagement, the quiet resistance, the accidental slowdown and the questions, how are you going to do it? It all comes down to 3 simple things. And this is the same with a lot of stuff. You need to be clear on the why. Start with the why. If you can't explain the reason for the change simply and confidently, then don't expect others to buy in. Simple, isn't it? If you can't explain that why, I'm making this change because, and I see the benefit of this. Why? Because of this. And why are we doing it? We are doing this because of this why. Then they're not going to get it. So remember up front, don't just do it because you fancy it as a whim. Do it because you've really got a why. And the why is usually driven by a problem, something not working. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because of this. Be consistent. Don't kill it, but, you've got to be consistent. You've got to be, there's nothing wrong with backing down, nothing wrong with having a conversation, but you're going to have to be resilient to it. So, nothing's going to kill your credibility faster than if you back down straight away. First sign of resistance, boom. So be consistent. This is a journey. This is a well thought out process. This will deliver my why and the business's why. And this means we're doing this. And it might not align to your people's why at first. And that's unfortunate. But you're going to have to make sure they're going through this change cycle with you. Now, you've got to remember the last piece of this. So you've got to be clear on your whys. You've got to be consistent, but you've also got to be fair. Not soft, but fair. Listen. Respect people's concerns. Don't confuse the understanding of it as being, argumentative. You can understand without an argument. Leadership isn't about keeping everyone happy. Remember that. Leadership is not about keeping everyone happy. It's about doing what's right for the business. Bringing people with you is a key thing. Getting people involved in the why, key thing. Being consistent, but make sure you're fair. So when you're explaining why this has happened, someone's going to feel it's unfair. I've been moved. This is unfair. So-and-so stayed. You need to explain to them why with those 3 things. This is the why. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to be fair and listen. But these are the decisions. Decisions are always going to stay with you. Accountability is going to stay with you. And my next point, when you need to make those big calls, there's a point that you might be been playing around with this team for a while. You might be moving around the edges. You've tried to develop and you see some green shoots. You see step forwards. Then you see them slipping back. When times get hard or it gets busy, they go back into old habits. That's when you probably need to look at that big call. When do you need to make that big call? You need to get the hardest parts done, not because they're bad people. Remember, this change is not because the people are bad. If the people are bad and they're not good at the jobs, that's performance management. That's when you really should be having a conversation with that person. And you're not moving people to get rid of your problems. Don't try to pass bad people to another department. That never works. They're still going to impact your business. So in the all round, you're going to get a problem. They might be better skilled in other areas. That's the right conversation. But if they're poor at timekeeping, they're poor at their behaviours, they don't actually know what they're doing, don't just try to shove them on somewhere else. That's not how we do these things. Because they're not underperforming. You're not moving that person because they're underperforming. You're moving them because you need to see something different from them that can drive the business forward. But remember, it's the long game. We're not going to be around keeping everyone happy, and it isn't sometimes around delivering in the first minute, but it's around leadership needs to get to a position where they are making the big calls. There is going to be a problem if you don't. What happens if you don't as a leader? What happens if these people don't deliver? Well, if they delay decisions, they hope things get better, then you're going to compromise your standards, aren't you? You're not going to get the results. And doing nothing is a strategy. Believe it or not, doing nothing is a strategy, but it's going to damage your team because everyone's going to see it. It's going to damage the standards that you've set if you allow people to drift and don't do the jobs, So you have to make those big calls because it's the right call, but it's going to be a tough call. But that's not your, driving factor. If you only made soft calls, it's just going to get worse. You're going to keep that whole team that sucks in position, if you like, because you don't want to make the big calls. You're in the wrong job. You're not going to be a leader. Now, we talked about internal changes there, moving people around internally. And I'm a big believer in getting people to move, getting people to develop, moving things around. That's the right thing to do. But there's also the power of bringing somebody in from outside. There's this power of the outsider. One of the most effective ways to change a team is to bring in outsiders. I've done it a lot in my career. Part of my job as a consultant is to go in and make changes. I'm outside. But the people sometimes struggle with this because they think internally we've developed them, and like I said, it's a good thing to do. But when you bring people in from outside, what do? Well, they don't know. That's the first thing. They don't know how things have been done. They start to ask the daft questions. They're always comfortable asking uncomfortable questions because they're new. And that's right. If you're at school, you don't know anything until you ask the questions. They're good at challenging assumptions. Challenging, why are we doing it this way around? Now, it annoys people sometimes if you challenge. Why are we doing it this way around? Well, it's just always done that way. Why are we doing it this way? Well, the customer always wants it that way. And when you actually dig into it, it's because the people have got comfortable. They don't like the idea of being challenged, and they don't like having to admit they were wrong because it's an ego thing. But people from outside bring different experiences. Outsiders, bring in that perspective of something different. And perspective is powerful because they've seen something new. They can see things that your team can't sometimes because they've not got the emotional attachment of the past. They haven't been through the pain, so they haven't got some of the scars which can hold you back. They haven't got the scar tissue, if you like. But there's also the key things that they will bring in, the ideas of seeing somewhere else, the ideas of what could be good. And you can't just drop them in and hope for the best, though, when you're bringing somebody outside in. It's a big job. If you're going to bring outsiders in, you've got to make sure you're setting them up to succeed. Give them the voice. Don't just put them in a corner and ignore them. I've been in one role a few years back where somebody didn't even speak to me. I was supposed to be working for them. And it was like, this is weird. And I think it's because even though they recruited me, they felt threatened. And of course, then they didn't want to give me a voice, kept me quiet. I didn't last long because what was the point? But you've got to protect them. When you bring somebody in, you've got to protect them. You've got to make sure that they've got some resilience, especially early, and make it clear why they're there. If you're bringing somebody in outside, you've seen something different. Especially if you're recruiting, you've got to make sure that they come in and they don't just fit to the exact culture and it swallows them up. And all of a sudden they're just doing the same as what the others do. End up with a clone. You want them to learn the process. You want them to work out how things work. But the last thing you want them to do is actually just become the same as what you've got, because then you might as well have kept what you already had. Now, what happens when it works? Let's finish off on the positive, the upside. Because when you get things right, it can be transformative. You'll see energy coming back to your team. You'll see the standards rising. You'll see the accountability improving and people taking responsibility. You'll get better results. There's no point in doing it if you don't. But you also get faster results. But more importantly, you build a culture that expects change. When you've done this first, there's a acceptance of it. It's a bit like if you leave your first job. I worked 14 years somewhere. Leaving that first job was the most painful thing I've done. It was like leaving a family member, like getting a divorce. But after that, I knew I could do something different. It was a time to go. And by building a culture that expects change, a team can then adapt quickly to new changes that come in. They can challenge themselves internally, and they can keep moving forward. And that is a great thing for a leader to have. And that's what great leaders want to create. Not comfort, not the idea of sustainability for the sake of it, but a team that evolves consistently and wants to move forward. Now, what happens if it goes wrong? Let's just have a quick look at the wrong. We're going to finish on a positive anyway, but if it goes wrong, then fine. You're an accountable leader. You need to put your hand up and go, this went wrong. It'll go wrong because you didn't build your whys. It'll go wrong because you weren't being consistent, or it'll go wrong because you're not fair. But if it does go wrong and you get challenged, be a person who can put their hand up and go, it didn't work. This is what I'm going to change, and this is my plan B or C. Because that, again, has a mindset of growth. It changes, and it says, I'm going to work with this team. I'm going to develop them. If they didn't fit in where I thought they were going to fit, that's on me, but let's make that change. So, when is it time to change your team? There's a question there. Well, look, there's a good thing to think of. When it's time is when, growth has stalled. Energy has started to drop, standards have slipped, and you see those people blaming and putting up the barricades around them. Or, of course, your future requirements are different. If you're going to change your team, it might be because you can see the future. Not with a crystal ball, but you can see the future. So, you know that things need to change. And remember, change isn't, if you need to change what's happening, doesn't mean you've failed with what's gone on. It means as a leader, you have seen the positives, but you've also seen areas where people can improve. And that's what you can improve me, because feedback's a gift. So I'm very happy to take any feedback. You can find me on socials. You can put feedback in there wherever you're listening to this. Love to engage on new and old topics. So if there is something you want to do, pop it in the comments. If you can, share this episode with others. I'm sure others would love listening to it. But that's it for me this week. And thank you so much for listening. And goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this Manager Matt podcast. We hope you found it interesting, helpful and actionable. One last thing, please leave a quick review on iTunes or with your podcast provider, as it helps to spread the word of Manager Matt. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you did like anything in particular, send an email to managermattpodcast@gmail.com or visit managermatt.co.uk for more content. Feedback is a gift, so let's keep giving. See you next week.